Good afternoon, everybody. Feel free to come in a little closer if you'd like to. We're going to try and make this conversational. So if you want to come and be conversational, the nice couches down here. My name is Simon Boughton. I'm the publishing director at Norton Young Readers, and I'm here to introduce you to, if you haven't met, although I know some of you have, introduce you to and moderate a conversation with Paula Yoo and Rex Ogle. As I said, some of you know these guys, but I'm going to introduce them anyway. Rex is the author of Free Lunch, Punching Bag, and Abuela, Don't Forget Me, among many other books, under many other names too. But I'm going to focus on those three. And most recently, and this May, of Road Home. Rex is now a resident of Los Angeles, so he's local to us here. These are among Rex's books, and indeed Paula's books, which I'll get to in a moment, are among the, I think, the jewels in Norton Young Readers' program. So I'm proud to have them both on the stage. Paula Yoo is the author of From a Whisper to a Rallying Cry, which is the story of the killing of Vincent Chin in Detroit in 1986, and most recently of Rising from the Ashes, which is also out this spring, which is about the LA uprising in 1992. And the thing about Paula is that by itself would be a substantial resume. She is also a journalist, a screenwriter, and a musician. And if I could bottle just a little bit of Paula's energy, I think I could do a lot more good in the world. And good in the world is why we're here. Both these authors are people with stories to tell, which are stories that are both compelling and necessary. And compelling and necessary, I think, are a good starting point for a conversation with them, because as an editor and as a publisher, what I'm most interested is in storytelling and how storytelling gives access to young readers to information and ideas. So both these books are full of information and ideas, but they're also compelling stories. And I thought I'd begin there with storytelling, and perhaps with Paula. Paula, you're a screenwriter, also a journalist, and I was curious to ask you how you think about storytelling and about process, and particularly how you organize such a complex story into a compelling, page-turning, powerful, propulsive narrative. And feel free to preface your answer to that question with a little bit about the book, if you'd like to, because
Of course.
Yeah.
Can everyone hear me? We're good? All right. I write TV, and I write books and everything, and I also play the violin, and the reason why I bring that up is because I consider all three storytelling. I'm telling a story, and in terms of telling a story, I always look bottom line for emotion. Who is that one person, that one character, whether it's fictional or nonfiction, on the page or on screen, that draws me in, and I want to see who they are at the start, what their obstacle is, how they overcome it. And sometimes they don't, but that's not the point. It's not about the end of the journey, it's how you get to the end of the journey. So everything that I write is very much about a person's journey, an intimate character story, if you will. And the hard thing about that with Rising from the Ashes, it's about the 1992 Los Angeles uprising. So how do I find that one person when 63 people were killed, over 12,000 were injured, and there were almost 3,000 fires, and in fact NASA could see the fires from space. That's how bad the civil unrest was in terms of the damage. But I found three families that I decided to focus on. I realized, it's about the lives of three families. Edward J. Song Lee, who was a 18-year-old Korean-American teenager who was shot and killed in the crossfire, ironically, by a Korean immigrant store owner trying to protect a store. And then also about the life and family of Latasha Harlins, the 15-year-old black girl who was wrongly accused of shoplifting by a Korean immigrant store owner who then shot and killed her and was given probation and a $500 fine. And finally, of course, as you know, Rodney King. We all know who he is. I think for the teenagers, we have to kind of say he was the OG police brutality victim in terms of viral media. And I interviewed all three families, and in doing so, I realized these three families have never met until recently. Their lives had intertwined the whole time, so that provided the backbone. So in other words, it's always just about character, no matter what. So, and it's the same, and I'll just say very briefly with Vincent Chin. He was the first Asian American federal hate crime trial from 1982 when he was killed. And again, that was about not just his story, but about his bride-to-be who was left. It was also about the people who were left behind. So that's how I approach stuff.
One of the things I particularly love about this book, about Rising from the Ashes, is not just the headline stories, King, Hollins, Eddie Lee, but there's so much texture in the stories of other individuals, the firefighters, the story of the wedding that almost didn't happen because of the fire, the Korean godfather of gangster rap. There's so much in this book, and I wonder perhaps you could tell a couple of those other stories. There's so much texture in this book that goes beyond these headline characters that I think give it great dimension and depth.
Oh, well, thank you. I interviewed almost 100 people for this book, and also primary resources, and going through court transcripts and police reports and everything like that, and all the statistics. But I found so many. It's kind of like, those limited miniseries you see on Netflix. All these little minor characters, and I was like, each little minor character, I gave them a beginning, middle, and end. So one was Emil Mack, who was a Korean War orphan who was adopted by a black family living in what we called back then South Central LA. We now call it South LA. So he identified culturally as black, but he knew racially he was of Korean descent, and he was the first. His firefighting. He was with the LA Fire Department. They were the first truck when Koreatown went on fire. And he had never been to Koreatown because, he identified culturally as black, and he lived in Compton. And so that was kind of like his first connection into coming to roots with his Korean heritage. And during the time, he was supposed to get married. In fact, him and his bride-to-be were shopping right when the fire started, and he turned to his bride-to-be and said, "Sorry, honey, I gotta go. I think they're gonna call us." And he did get married. They blocked off the freeway, but he said, "I'm with the LA Fire Department. You gotta let me get married." So he did get married, and the sad postscript, however, was the tuxedos that they rented. The store burned down when they went to return them. So, but that was an amazing story. Just going very quickly to the Korean godfather of gangster rap. Back in the late 1980s, 1990s, there was gangster rap, which was a growing popular, basically a poetry of the street type rap music. No holds barred. F-bombs, really gritty lyrics about how hard it was back then, and a lot of stories about police brutality against young black men, and nobody would sell these records because they were scared, and all the major retailers would not stock this stuff. So I met a young man named Kirk Kim, and his father, Won Jun Kim, saw an opportunity. He said, "Well, if no one's going to sell this, and this is really popular music, I'm going to sell it." So he sold it in kind of an area like this in a mall, the Compton Swap Meet, and so suddenly he became a celebrity, and all the famous rappers from Snoop Dogg to Public Enemy and Eazy-E, they all would hang out, and Mrs. Kim would kind of chastise Eazy-E. She would tell him, "Pull your pants up, I'll give you some ice cream." And it was, and in fact, when both Kirk Kim's parents eventually passed away, all the famous rap stars were there for the funerals and stuff. And I think what my book does that is a little different from I also have more of a focus. So I'll wrap this up, but with Rising from the Ashes, it's really about, it really focuses on the Korean American and the black communities, because we were basically gaslit, and we were basically kind of portrayed as, oh, we all hate each other, and it's your fault that LA went up in smoke, as opposed to looking at the elephant in the room, which was systemic racism and white supremacy laws that had been rooted in place in Los Angeles for decades, if not centuries. So again, I had to look through the lives of these people, and I think that by humanizing their stories and having you go along with them, you're rooting for them. You want them to win.
So Rex, I'm gonna first of all ask you just to give us a little précis of Road Home, just tell us a little bit about what it is, and then we talk a little bit about storytelling for you too.
Yeah. So Road Home is a true story. It's a memoir about my dad kicking me out for being gay when I was 17, and the time that came after, the 3 months after, where I ended up on the streets of New Orleans. So dealing with not having family, not having friends, not having food. It was a very scary time in my life, and that's what the story is about.
So you're a former editor. You've written prose, you've written verse, you've written
Graphic
comics.
novels.
Yes, I was getting there. You've written comics. As I said, many names, many hats. The trilogy that ends with Road Home, I think, has a very striking storytelling style. It's written in short chapters that don't always connect in a kind of linear, kind of conventional narrative time frame, but they kind of create a map of your experience. And I guess I wanted to ask you how you think about the craft of storytelling and how that approach to that sort of very pointillistic approach to telling what is a very deeply felt and very personal story, how you came to that did it just sort of arise one day, or was it a kind of a calculated storytelling choice? How did you come there?
I mean, for me, like, I always wanted to write. Since I was a little kid, I wanted to tell stories. I think stories are what move us. You know, since the dawn of mankind, we were sitting in caves, hiding from saber-toothed tigers, talking about our day around a campfire. And stories are an exchange of information, of emotion. It's what our connection is to other people. And you learn through stories. And so growing up, I was obsessed with prose, cartoons, toys, because I could create my own stories. And yeah, so I feel like when I was a kid, I was writing just prose and poetry. But when it came to writing Free Lunch, the first thing I thought was, okay, it's definitely prose, obviously. And I wrote it as an adult looking back, and I was like, this doesn't work at all. Like, this is, obviously I survived, like, that's kind of a spoiler. But what if I wrote the story from the point of view of the kid? And I was like, okay, that's gonna be difficult, because like I really have to go into that emotional space, in that head space. And I was like, okay, maybe it'll be easier if I do it as a graphic novel. I wrote like 5 pages of it, and I was like, nope, this isn't something I can collaborate on, because I need this to be from my perspective. I can't have an artist stepping in and trying to grasp all the things I have in my mind. And so prose was like the obvious choice, and going into it, I think just getting that headspace as a kid, like, I watched all the same TV shows I watched back then. I listened to the same radios. Like, Google is amazing, because I'm like, what was on in 1989 in the fall? And you can find everything, TV programming, movie lists, what's on the radio. And so I really got back in that mindset. And it was strange going into that headspace, but as I put it on paper, it was like being in a trance. And so prose was it was the only way to go.
Yeah, I think one of the things that struck me reading Free Lunch was for the first time was how authentically the voice of a 6th grade child it seemed to me to be, that you had successfully, inhabited that former you. So I think that's a real accomplishment.
It's just because I'm childish.
Yeah, well, yeah, young at heart. Place is an important character in both your books. New Orleans and Texas for you. Do you think about place as character? I know that the things around you figured heavily. The books you were reading and the shows and the music you were listening to figured heavily in your life at that time. What about place? And I think small town Texas and New Orleans in the new book come to life pretty vividly.
I mean, yeah, our environment, they always say nature versus nurture when it comes to certain behaviors, whether you're gay or not. I feel like your environment and what's inside you are equally important. So when I'm telling a story, I try to give life to that place, or at least try to visualize it in terms of the senses, like, how did the humidity taste? How did it feel on my skin? What did the bird sound like? And I think adding that texture makes it more real, because at the end of the day, the writer is supposed to be a telepath. We're supposed to be moving the story from our heads into the heads of young readers. And so very much, I mean, the locations, the cities, New Orleans was a monster that I lived inside. And it was scary, but at times, like, you look around at the other people the tourists, like having a good time, drinking beer, getting beads. And there's such a distinction, a divide between them and me, but we're both in this city, this place, and it's a very like almost a liminal realm. It's bizarre, yeah.
Paula, LA is important to you. It's very. I know it's present not just in your books, but in your life too.
Yeah, I've been in Los Angeles since 1995, and before that, I lived in Detroit. I wrote for the Detroit News. I used to be a journalist, and actually, Detroit was a big character in my Vincent Chin book as well. But I think the reason why I too love the environment and setting as a character is because when I was in the 11th grade, I took American literature, AP American literature, and they taught you about naturalism and realism, and I just love that whole concept of like the American landscape. You think about books by Theodore Dreiser or John Steinbeck. It's like the place is a character, and as this is actually where my screenwriting comes into play, because as a screenwriter, I'm an executive producer at that level, showrunner, and I've written for over 12 shows from The West Wing to Supergirl on the CW, and I've sold shows. And one of the things is that when you write a TV screenplay or a movie screenplay, it is all about the visuals. The visuals cannot just be there because it's a cool sight. It's got to reflect the emotion, the character. There's got to be a theme there. So I think that's why writing about Detroit and LA, and to give you an example, again, I think how you describe, like Rex did a great job about talking about the actual physical and the senses of a place. I also like to talk about place through the point of view of the character. So for example, you look at Edward Lee's mother comes from the Korean War, comes to LA, and the most beautiful thing she ever saw in her life were the freeways, because there was these beautifully manicured, the 10 freeway, the 110 freeway, just like the way this intricate tree route. Like she's flying in, she's like, what, this is amazing. I'm coming from war-torn Korea, where our whole, my house burned down, and there's water sprinklers and everything. But what she didn't realize was that same vista that I just described to you, those were also racist highways, freeways that were developed after the 1930s to separate black and white Los Angeles. So the 10 freeway raised and destroyed upper middle class black neighborhoods, very beautiful homes, just so that way the white community didn't have to go through black neighborhoods to get to the supermarket or whatever. So that created food deserts and everything. So what she saw, which was just this technological miracle, was also an insidious form of racism and white supremacy, and she didn't realize that. And and then I talk about Korea, and so the way I bring that story together is that she left one civil war, coming to another civil war in America, where the new DMZ was the 10 freeway. So that's an example of how I try to use environment, in multiple layered ways to tell a story and to convey emotion.
So we talked about storytelling a little bit. Thought maybe we talk about content. Both these books navigate their way through really difficult content. Rex in Road Home, you confront sex, violence, despair, and the honesty with which you write about these things, to me, is a wonderful gift to give to a reader to offer. And I wondered how you thought about navigating such charged and personal material for your readers, how you approached it.
I mean, do y'all ever have that dream, or at least when you were a kid, that you show up at school naked? I had that dream many times.
We've all had that dream.
Oh my God, yes. Traumatizing, horrible.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to be naked. I didn't want people as a kid to know that I was poor. I didn't want them to know that I was gay. I didn't want them to know that I was struggling with domestic violence at home. Like, I wanted to hide myself. I didn't want anyone to see me, and that made me feel very, very alone. And growing up in Texas in the 80s and 90s, very homophobic, very anti-Hispanic, I desperately felt alone. So as I got older, I moved to New York City, pursued my dream of being a writer by being a book editor, because I wanted to learn. I wanted to learn about the craft, because I was writing books and trying to sell them and rejected thousands of times. And I was like, obviously I'm dumb and I'm worthless and I'm doing it all wrong, so I will go and I will learn. And I think what I learned over 15 years working in editorial was that I saw these other writers and artists burying themselves. And I was like, oh, that's what I'm not doing in anything that I write. Is I don't want to talk about anything from my past. And I was like, so if what I've been doing isn't working, I need to do the opposite, which is to reveal myself. And I did, and it was, and I don't think I realized as I was writing it how naked I was going to get, because now I do school visits, and while I am fully dressed, because they are schools, I feel like I'm burying myself to these kids, and these kids, it's funny because, you know, especially like middle school and junior high, like the kids will look at me and they'll be like, you know, turn their heads away because they're too cool. But then I'll get direct messages on social media and they'll be like, I'm going through the same thing. We're broke. We don't know where our next meal's coming from. My dad beats me. And luckily there are resources and I can be like, here's a great resource you can find online. Here's a number you can call. But these kids need to be seen, because even though we're all having that dream about being naked at school, we're all really showing up completely covered and hiding our true selves. So yeah, it's weird, but it's kind of important.
And I've observed the response you get from readers, which is that they offer you some part of themselves in return quite frequently. They'll, as you said, they may text you. I've noticed how you put a little bit of space between yourself and other kids so that you can talk one-on-one with kids at events. How does that feel?
Okay, the funny thing is my abuela, when I was in high school, was like, she wanted me to go to Abilene Christian University, and I knew I was gay, but I didn't talk about it, but I was like, I don't know if that's for me because they hate me. But I went the summer between my junior and senior year of high school for junior scholars program. But the first thing they make you do is take a test. It's like 800 questions, and it's like, what are you going to do with your life? I got youth minister, and I was like, no. So yeah, I was like, I'm a writer, I'm a storyteller, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to write X-Men one day. That's all I ever wanted to do, was write X-Men comics, or maybe become Stephen King, because that's not too ambitious. But now it's weird because I write kids' books because I am childish. I play with Legos still. And so to go to school visits and talk to these kids, it's so strange. But then I was like, oh my God, I'm a youth minister. But what I'm ministering is that you're not alone, that there are services that can help. There are people you can talk to. You don't have to feel so overwhelmed by life, because let's face it, we're all suffering in our own ways. We all have some pain. We all have some trauma. And what I've done in the course of writing these books is I've gotten so in touch with that little kid inside me, that version of myself, that I've learned how to take care of him. I eat cookies for dinner sometimes. For my birthdays, I'm taking my friends to Chuck E. Cheese, and they're like, what is wrong with you? And I'm like, I never had a Chuck E. Cheese party. I want a Chuck E. Cheese party. And I think what I'm trying to teach these kids is, like, you have to take care of yourself first before anything else. And that's something we all need to do. I think I rambled. Was that?
No, you didn't ramble. Okay. Not at all. Paula, in Rising from the Ashes, when we think about challenging content, you describe and have to sort of navigate decades of systemic racism, the feelings and the perspectives of communities who have deep roots in Los Angeles and who have, as you mentioned earlier, have frequently been sort of cast in opposition to each other. And I imagine that even for the most scrupulous of journalists and writers, that's a very complex landscape to travel. There must be landmines at every turn. And I wondered how you kind of kept your sense of balance and perspective through a story that is at once you want to keep a sort of a historian's distance from, but also at the same time it's so intimate and personal that these lives are so vivid. I wondered how you dealt with the sort of political complexity of your story.
Ironically, I went even closer.
Yeah.
Because I'm Korean American, and I grew up in Connecticut. I lived in Korea for a little bit, but then I moved to LA in '95. So I've been out here the longest. But I remember in 1992 when the live footage started happening about the Rodney King verdicts, the LAPD. They were acquitted, and it was just horrifying. I was on a date. I was at a bar. The date ended because I just was glued to the TV screen. And one of the most horrifying things for me, being a Korean American, was seeing Latasha Harlins get shot in the back of the head, by a Korean immigrant store owner who could have, been my mom or my aunt or something like that. And I think that that's one of the problems of being BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, person of color in this country, is we're not allowed to be individuals. We still have to, every time someone from our community or our race does something, we have this collective, this collective kind of connection to it, whether we should or not. I'm not from LA. My parents didn't own a store. I lived in Connecticut. I mean, I was as far away from that Korean American community as non-Koreans were. So I decided to go even deeper into that and find out, who was Sunja-do, the woman who killed Latasha Harlins? How did the families feel, and things like that. So I just actually went closer, and by doing that ironically gave me more distance, if that makes sense, because I went so close to it, and I thought about my own dad and what he went through coming through this country, that it really made me able to really empathize and sympathize and just kind of connect with everyone that I interviewed. So people were dying to talk to me, except for a few people. I'm just going to Vincent Chin really quickly too. With that book, I was the first person to interview Ronald Ebens, the man who killed Vincent Chin. He beat him to death with a baseball bat. I was the first person to go to his house live in person and talk to him, since Michael Moore did that in 1987. So over almost 50 years later, I'm the first writer to do that, and that was an important thing as well. So I think that when I get that, and also as an Asian American, I'm meeting a man who represents symbolically anti-Asian hate. And he cried, I cried, and I also interviewed Vincent Chin's family and things like that. So by getting as close as possible, that actually gives me some distance, because I'm able to kind of be in their shoes. Does that
I have
answer?
I still have somewhere in my email folders a very sort of intense email I got from you that afternoon. Paula loves Las Vegas. I'm just going to put that out there. And Evans lives in Henderson, correct?
Yeah.
So I think you were there for your wedding anniversary or something
Yeah,
that.
we got married in Vegas, and
I got an email from Paula, or a text saying, I'm sitting in his driveway, and he talked to me, and I got this sort of visceral download. But I have huge respect for that as a process, and I think it something that I am particularly proud of when it comes to Vincent Chin is this is your Vincent Chin book this is young adult literature telling a story for the first time, in some ways. I think your book was the first book for any audience about that case, that told that story, and it's a book that is written for a young adult audience. And I wanted to sort of offer you the chance to talk about why you chose to tell it for that audience and not for a different one.
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, and I also want to just emphasize too, before I forget, that both my books are not just straight ahead nonfiction books. My books all have brand new information that has never been told before, new stuff, because history is a living document. It keeps changing. We keep seeing more. So just for Rising from the Ashes briefly, with the families that I interviewed, a lot of times Latasha Harlins' family and Sunja-do's families were wrongly accused of being anti-Korean, anti-Asian, or xenophobic, or anti-Black, when that actually was not the case. And I have new information about how, with the Harlins family, they've been working with a Korean church recently for reconciliation and just supporting each other. And I just think that's really beautiful. With Vincent Chin, the new information that is from is it's not just about the killing of Vincent Chin, but I happened to meet the son of his bride. His bride, Vicky Wong, ended up moving on with her life and getting married. And I met Jared Liu, who was a photographer, and he told me that he never knew about his mom's secret past until the 30th anniversary of Vincent Chin. And that's when he saw a picture of his mom from 1982, and he was like, oh my God, Mom? And so my book is also about his trying to confront his mom and say, we need to talk about this. And the happy postscript is that he did a beautiful Vincent Chin photography art exhibit that won a competition, and it's hanging up at the Smithsonian National Art Gallery in Washington, D.C. So we have that. And then I lost track of the question. There was actually a specific question. I'm sorry.
How did you choose your audience?
Oh, how did I choose? Yeah. So, this is why it comes back to that, is because, yes, both books could have been adult, but the reason why I did this was because, first of all, I have to credit Tricia Lawrence of the Aaron Murphy Literary Agency, because she said to me at first when I was working on Vincent Chin, I was actually going to turn it into a screenplay, and she said, "I've never heard of that story. That should be a nonfiction book." And then I realized, wait a minute, I wish I knew about this in high school. I would have stood up more against anti-Asian hate, racism, or spoken out more in solidarity about this stuff. This stuff needs to be taught in high school. So that's actually what made me think I want to write this for the young adult audience, but I don't sanitize or censor or simplify anything. I mean, there are F-bombs in both books. There are graphic pictures of death and violence, and I don't shy away from the very graphic details of how Vincent Chin was killed. What the killing of Latasha and also Edward Lee. So that's why I think a lot of adults read my books too. But what makes them kind of young adult though still is, as with when you say you're a child and you're writing, you're still a kid. When everybody that I talk to, I always ask them, what was your favorite class in high school? What were you like as a kid? What was the one moment that triggered you as a child or teenager that put you on the path today to become a prosecuting attorney, to become a firefighter, to become a police officer, to become an activist? And then that way, the kids, when they read my book, they're not just reading about activist Helen Zia or, Ronald Eben's defense attorney. They're also reading about what they were like as high school students and what led to where they are today. And I think that's just really important. And I think the final thing I'll say is that with Vincent Chin especially, that book went viral, and no pun intended, but it was because it came out 1 week after the Atlanta spa shootings. My phone rang off the hook. I was talking to CNN. Remember that I had like 100 Zooms in like 2 weeks. It was overwhelming, and I think that there was this hunger, and that's what kind of started. We need to teach AAPI history, K through 12, and things like that. So I'm actually really glad I did that, because I feel that that's my contribution in terms of, I don't want kids today growing up the way I did, where I learned about Vincent Chin after college. I didn't really know about the Korean American immigration thing until, recently. And that's a shame, because that's a part of my youth and my education that I lost, and I'm trying to make up for it now, and that angers me. So.
Yeah, Rex, I'm struck actually listening to you by the fact that you both have told stories that set in the 80s. But Rex,
there's an 80s concert tonight.
Yes, we should go. Rex, what do you think? You're looking back to your young adulthood. It feels it's a story that rings very true. It feels very contemporary. But I wonder how you feel the world has changed for teens in the time since you were 18. Yeah, go on.
I'm not ignoring y'all to text anyone. So I have 3 pictures on my phone cover. One is my dog Toby, one is my new nephew, and then one says 11 million children in this country live in poverty. It's estimated that 3.5 million experience domestic violence. 4.2 million do not have homes, and 40%, or 1.6 million of those, identify as LGBT or Q. Things have changed in our country. Things have stayed the same in our country. I'm so glad we have so many resources. There are, the Trevor Project, 1-800-RUNAWAY, Suicide Hotline. I am so glad these things exist. If they existed when I was a kid, I did not know about it. And when I was writing Free Lunch, I was like, oh my God, I was on the free lunch program. That was so embarrassing. I'm sure kids are getting fed these days. Surely hunger has been addressed in the last 35, 40 years. I mean 20, because I'm really young. It hasn't. It's been in the news. The free lunch programs come and go. I just gave a speech in Abilene, Texas, where I was born, to cafeteria workers. And while I was writing the speech, I looked it up, or I was doing research. And Texas just passed on a $450 million program to give $120 to families who can't afford to give their kids lunch. because they're not in school. They don't have lunch. And Texas passed on it because they're like, it's too difficult to put into place. That was their reason. It's too difficult to put into place, so we're just going to pass on the $450 million for these kids who are hungry. So I guess to answer your question...
It's not much, right?
It's not much. I mean,
Not
it's
enough.
like $120 a month or a week, but when you're feeding a kid, I mean, kids are growing. They need food. They need to be fed, because if you're not fed, you can't focus. If you can't focus, you can't learn. And I grew up with that, and it is really upsetting to me that this still happens in our country today, and especially with minorities, with Asian populations, Mexican populations, black populations, even they're white, but so many of these people are underserved and they're kept back because their families don't have money. And I'm like, how do you get out of that? How do you survive that and then make something with your life? How do you go on? And so for me, like, writing this stuff is, I guess, I don't know, I'm trying to get people to wake up and have those difficult conversations, because so much about our country is about adults not having those difficult conversations with their kids. They don't want to talk about sex. They don't want to talk about hunger. They don't want to talk about things happening with other families, because they're like, oh, that's sad, that's depressing, it'll make you upset. And so it's like, even with parents, like in marriages, in weddings, I mean, like all of us, sometimes it's hard to have a conversation with your partner about something that is important to you, and it can create a divide. And I think conversations are so important, especially the difficult ones, which is kind of what I learned by writing these books.
We have 5 minutes or so. I have a couple more questions, but I'm quite happy to defer them to anybody in the audience who has questions. So if there is anybody who's dying to ask a question of our authors, please feel free to raise a hand or step forward.
Trust me, the kids and school visits ask everything, the darkest questions, so y'all can't offend me.
But somebody, okay, I was gonna.
Hi. So I'm a school librarian, and I've used both of your books as excerpts and lessons and things. So with these 2 new ones, are there particular highlights that you would suggest that would be a good excerpt or a good thing to incorporate in a lesson? I mean, I usually do it with English or social studies, so I work with all subjects as a school librarian. But would there be a particular part you're like, this would be a good highlight for like a 30-minute class or something?
Well, I do have, in between all the character emotional stuff, I do have a lot of facts. So I do talk a little bit about food deserts is something that I think, just bouncing off you, I think with redlining in Los Angeles and the segregation of a lot of these communities, it led to food deserts where, and that's defined by a town or a city where you're several miles away from the nearest supermarket. And so that's actually why a lot of the Korean store owners started selling diapers and baby formula along with liquor, because that was it for these families. And that's an interesting way, I think, of looking at. To me, that was interesting because it personified and made it easy to understand economics. Because given this year and everything, economics is a really it's a hard subject. Kids kind of their eyes glaze over. It's hard for them to understand money, but then that's easy to understand. So I have things like that throughout the book that might help in terms of, especially for social sciences. But thank you so much and for your advocacy.
I'm trying to pull up little pieces in my head. I would say, hit me up on social media and ask later so I can flip through the books. But I think, like, pick a chapter and just maybe have the kids read that or have the teacher read that, because I know that there are specific chapters in the book, and they're short, which kids like, where you can address certain things. Like in Free Lunch, it addresses poverty, it addresses domestic violence, and there's even a teacher who did not like my appearance. When I'm in the sun, I turn dark brown because I am half Mexican. And, I came to school with holes in my clothes. My shoes were, the little bottoms were flapping off. My backpacks were the same backpack I had from like 2nd grade on. And she just, because I went through a very rich school district, and the way she looked at me was just very judgy, like I was going to steal something, like I was going to hit someone. and she definitely graded me harder, and I call her out. And these, I think, are conversation starters and things that teachers really appreciate, because some of their kids are, like I said earlier, like hiding themselves. And I think for kids to know that this stuff is going on with other kids is just so important. And I think opening those conversations to not make it standard, but make it known that this is a fact of life.
Oh, I just wanted to add too, because we both write so much about character. You could literally just pick a name, take a character, and have your students follow that. Do a search. Just look up Edward Lee. Follow him. Where is he from? And that's a character. It's the hero's journey. I'm a TV writer. That's what we all. This is the hero's journey. Who is he at the beginning? Who does he become at the end? He becomes Spider-Man. So and you can. Every single character has a beginning, middle, and end, and you can just pull that out. That would be an interesting exercise.
Yeah. That's cool. Anybody else, or I can wrap up with maybe one more question, unless anybody wants to ask. So, what's next? And perhaps in a minute or less, each of you could say something about how these stories have shaped you as writers, as creators, and how you're thinking about the future and what you're going to do with your time now. And you have a minute each.
Okay. My next book is going to be about my 3 cats, because I'm so sad after I write these books. I'm in a bad mood. I'm always yelling at my husband and I'm reading all this stuff. So yeah, I just want to write about my cats. Long story short, because I was in the WGA strike, union strong here, I'm still looking for work, trying to sell another TV show or get staffed and work on another book. So that's about it. And I'm doing a lot of traveling. So I'm going to Korea this year. I think that will hopefully inspire another book. So stay tuned. Keep your fingers crossed. But if there are any studio people here, I'm available.
So I just got back from American Bookseller Association in New Orleans, which is where I was homeless. He did this. But it was amazing because I got up and I did the closing keynote with Marcus Shiro, who is a fantastic, amazing writer as well. And what I realized up on that stage was writing Free Lunch was hard. Writing Punching Bag was harder. Writing Road Home was so intense. But when I got the finished copy in my hands and I put it on my bookshelf, and those 3 books were on the bookshelf, I felt this sense of relief come over me. And the last 3 years I've been in a very dark place because my abuela died and a lot of other bad things happened. I was in a horrible space. I put those 3 books on the shelf and I started to come out of it. I came out of the dark place. I used all these things, tools, therapy, antidepressants, blah, blah, blah. I'm trying to be fast. 30 seconds.
You're good.
And when I was on that stage and someone asked me a question about, do you feel closure? And I was like, I feel healed. I feel like I took all my pain, I put it in these 3 books, and I trapped it. And it's on my bookshelf now, and in beautiful covers, but it's literally trapped. I survived that, and I have to remind myself, this happened 25 years ago. I survived, I went back to New Orleans, I stayed in a hotel, I had food, which he paid for, and there was a lot of crying. There was a lot of crying, a few panic attacks, but the booksellers embraced me, they gave me hugs. And so to come full circle was amazing. But I told myself no more memoirs ever again. So I started writing one book about my senior year when I used to run around with drug dealers who were my best friends.
It's coming out next year.
Yeah, but it's fiction. It's now fiction because he's like, do you want to? And I was like, no. Fiction is easier to write, and it's called When We Ride, and I'm super excited. And it's in verse, so kids will read it because it's a fast read.
Well, Paula, Rex, you have my deep, deep thanks for spending time here, as do you all for coming and for the work you do, and for your work, especially for your work. These are important books. I am immensely proud to be associated with them, and they will be on my shelf for a long, long time. So thank you both. Rex and Paula are signing at Norton's booth in about half an hour. If anybody would like to come by and continue the conversation.
Come say hi or give us a hug. I'll give you hugs.
And thank you, Simon. He rocks. He's the great editor. We
Thank you.
appreciate you.
Thank
It's
you.
an honor to work with you. Thank you.
And y'all are the frontline people, so an honest, heartfelt thank you to all of y'all, because librarians in many ways saved my life when I was a kid by putting books into my hands so that I could escape into fantasy worlds. And y'all do this every day, so thank you.